Welcome, everyone. We're diving into some heavy topics on how new wars might actually signal the decline of the American empire, and the rosy narrative behind ending stupid wars.
Yeah, that's a bold claim. So we're talking about um, this perspective from, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson and his take on the current state of U.S. war policies, right?
Exactly. He paints a picture of an administration, yeah, the Trump administration, that despite campaigning on ending conflicts, ended up being, one of the most chaotic and conflict prone periods in modern history.
Right, it's almost ironic. The promise of ending wars turns into creating a whole mess of new ones, conflicts that could ultimately lead to a collapse of the empire.
Absolutely. And the discussion touches on a lot of critical themes like the divide between military priorities and the State Department's diplomatic approaches when it comes to war, and how that dissonance has fueled this chaos.
Yeah, that clash between military action and strategic diplomacy seems to be a recurring problem. It's like they're pulling in opposite directions at a time when the nation needs unified direction.
Right. And one key point Wilkerson makes is about the so called unbelievable incompetence in policy coordination at the White House.
Yep.
He argues that the chaos isn't accidental, but a direct result of clashing agendas among the leadership.
It's interesting because you'd think that ending stupid wars would mean having fewer conflicts overall, but here we see a potential storm brewing, especially with, provocative actions towards countries like Venezuela and Iran.
Exactly. And it's like, uh, there's a disconnect between rhetoric and reality. Trump's campaign slogans promised an end to endless wars, yet the actions not only continued the conflicts, but in some cases escalated them, sometimes through proxy engagements.
So, how does Wilkerson explain this paradox? He kind of says that there's a dark satisfaction in these proxy wars, isn't that right?
Yep, he even goes as far as arguing that Trump, contrary to his verbal promises, actually seems to relish the idea of killing people indirectly through proxies. It's a disturbing contradiction, really.
That definitely sounds like a critique of leadership values. But I wonder, isn't there a risk of oversimplifying or even exaggerating these intentions?
That's a fair point. There's room for critique here. While Wilkerson's assertions are provocative, some might argue that labeling strategic military engagements as a sort of relish for killing could oversimplify complex geopolitical calculations. But his perspective is, rooted in decades of military experience.
True, experience does lend a strong voice to his warnings. And what about this idea that the American empire is on the brink? How does he tie that to these new conflicts?
Well, he argues that the continuous drift into these mismanaged wars is pushing the empire past its sustainable limits. It's like you keep stirring the pot and eventually the empire burns out.
And it seems that power is shifting east. There's this notion of a historical decline where America's dominance is fading while, global realignments favor new centers of power.
Exactly. It's almost like an inevitable cycle, a rise and, a fall. He suggests that as America's internal policies spiral, power inevitably shifts back toward the east, where different alliances and strategies are emerging.
Right, and in this context, there's also that discussion about Israel's role and how its aggressive moves might drag the US into a protracted conflict with Iran.
Yes, oh yeah. According to Wilkerson, there's a very real risk that Israel's actions, combined with a miscalibrated US response, could lead to a decade-long conflict with Iran, possibly kicking off even before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that sounds almost cinematic in its scope. A prolonged war before a major holiday. It's almost hard to process.
It is. And he raises the point that such a conflict wouldn't just be a regional flare-up. It could signify a much larger systematic decline in US power, essentially marking the end of an empire built on military might.
Right. I have to ask though, while the narrative is compelling, isn't it a bit alarmist to tie every misstep directly to an inevitable collapse? What about the resilient parts of the US government and institutions that have withstood past crises?
That's a solid critique. I mean, yes, America's institutional resilience is well documented, but Wilkerson's argument is that the cumulative effect of these missteps, a lack of coherent strategy, overlapping and conflicting agendas, and reckless provocation, might overwhelm even that resilience eventually.
That makes sense. It's less about a single policy failure and more about sustained systemic issues, isn't it?
Precisely. It's like a domino effect. You know, one inefficient, chaotic decision after another gradually chips away at the empire's foundation until one day it just can't hold up anymore.
Yeah. And here's another twist. The interview points out the internal debate, the military versus the State Department. That internal conflict, how do you think that compounds the problem?
It seriously muddies the strategic waters. When the military pushes for aggressive tactics while the diplomatic corps advocates for careful negotiation, you end up with a disjointed approach. It's like trying to drive a car with one foot on the brake. Inevitably, something is going to go wrong.
Absolutely. So, from his perspective, these internal contradictions are not just bureaucratic squabbles, they're fundamental weaknesses that could signal a larger impending collapse.
Yes, and he even stresses that this isn't just about foreign policy. It's about reflecting a deeper malaise within the political leadership, the inability to coordinate, to speak with one voice.
Right. That definitely gives a somber tone to American foreign policy in the near future.
Yep, and then there's the Alaska Summit discussion, which apparently was a microcosm of these broader tensions. It highlighted sharp differences in opinion not only about strategy, but also about understanding the enemy and handling alliances.
Yeah, the Alaska Summit seems to have been a critical juncture, a place where all these internal contradictions and ambiguous intentions were laid bare.
Exactly. And one of the most chilling aspects is how these missteps could potentially spiral into a full-blown conflict that drags in allies, further complicating an already precarious situation.
Yep, and ultimately, this whole narrative forces us to ask, can the US adapt before it's too late? Or are these internal rotations and miscalculations foretelling a historic turning point?
That's the question. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Each misstep is a warning sign of a much larger collapse. And while there are voices within the establishment trying to steer a course, the momentum of these new wars might just be too overpowering.
It's fascinating yet terrifying how these predictions of decline mingle with real-time international tensions, from provocations in Venezuela and Iran to shifts in alliances like those involving Israel.
Absolutely. It's almost as if every geopolitical move is a piece of a larger jigsaw puzzle that, when fully assembled, paints the picture of an empire in its twilight.
Right. Well, it's been quite a journey unpacking all these layers, from internal conflicts and policy misfires to the specter of a future war that could redefine global power structures.
Yeah, indeed. There's a lot to digest, and it keeps you thinking long after the conversation ends about how history might just be on the cusp of a new, dramatic chapter.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely be keeping an eye on these developments as they unfold. Thanks for the stimulating chat on these complex issues.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Stay informed, stay critical, and we'll catch you next time.